I didn't know my life was about to split in two over a truth I never expected to hear from the man I loved. Not because of cheating, at least not at first, not because of lies about money or betrayal with a friend, but because of a promise he made to his family, and the moment he chose to break it with someone who wasn't me. For 4 years, I had been the patient one, the understanding one, the girl who kept telling herself that love meant waiting, that if I loved him enough, time would eventually give us what we both wanted. His name was Jake, and I met him when we were still students, still figuring out who we were supposed to become. He came from a deeply traditional family. His father was a respected church minister. His mother devoted her life to the community. Jake didn't go to church much anymore, but some promises never really leave you. One of them was the vow he made as a teenager: no sex before marriage. When he told me that in the beginning, I said I could handle it. I meant it, at least I thought I did. We loved each other. We laughed easily. We shared friends, dreams, late-night talks about the future. I told myself that intimacy was more than just bodies, that emotional closeness would be enough. But years passed, and enough slowly turned into loneliness. While I was still juggling part-time jobs and instant noodles, Jake graduated early and landed a good position at a consulting firm in the city. He started telling me stories about office dinners, work drinks, colleagues who treated him like he already belonged somewhere bigger, and I started feeling like I was standing still while his life was moving forward without me. 8 months ago, I finally walked away. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I couldn't keep waiting for a future that kept drifting farther out of reach. Then, just when I had started to rebuild my life, he came back. Not with an apology, not with clarity, but with an offer that changed everything. He told me that if we got back together now, we could finally be complete. Only later did I understand what that really meant. He had already given what I waited years for to someone else. And suddenly, the promise that once kept us apart didn't matter anymore. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about love. It was about timing, choice, and the quiet cruelty of being the one who waits, while someone else gets the ending you were promised. I'm 24, and when I look back at the version of myself who met Jake 4 years ago, I almost want to hold her face in my hands and whisper, "Be careful." Not because he's evil, because he's human, and humans can love you, and still choose something that breaks you. We met at a university student event, one of those awkward mixers where everyone pretends they're confident while clutching cheap plastic cups of soda. I remember spotting him across the room because he didn't act like he needed attention. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just calm, observant, the kind of guy whose silence felt safer than someone else's charm. He walked up to me first. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck like he was embarrassed by his own courage. "I'm Jake. I think you're the only person here who looks as uncomfortable as I feel." I laughed, real laughter, the kind that loosens your chest. And that was it. That simple moment became a doorway into something that felt steady from the very beginning. We started dating quickly. It didn't feel rushed. It felt natural, like we'd been orbiting the same space and finally collided. For the first stretch of our relationship, we were that couple our friends teased lovingly. Always together, always sharing earbuds, always showing up with matching coffee orders because we remembered the details. We studied in the library until closing time. We cooked cheap pasta in my tiny kitchen. We made each other playlists. We went on late-night drives just to talk, the city lights sliding across his face while he told me about his childhood, his father's sermons, the weight of being the good son. And that was the first time the topic came up. We were lying on my bed, fully clothed, his arm around my waist. I'd been tracing absent lines on his forearm when he went quiet, too quiet, like he was gathering a confession. "I need to tell you something before this goes further," he said. I lifted my head. "Okay," he swallowed. "I promised my dad I wouldn't have sex until marriage." The words didn't hit like a bomb then. They landed like a strange fact, something I hadn't expected but could adapt to. "Oh," I said carefully, "because of church?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the ceiling like it was safer than looking at me. "He's a minister. My mom's really involved. When I was 14, I promised him. I know it sounds old-fashioned. I don't even go regularly anymore, but the promise..." His voice cracked a little. "It matters to him, and I don't want to disappoint him." I could have walked away right there if I'd been honest about what I needed, but I wasn't. I was in love with the version of love that felt noble, patient, understanding. the kind of love that waits. So I reached for his hand and said, "Okay, we can take it slow." His shoulders loosened like he'd been holding his breath for hours. He kissed my forehead like I had just proven I was safe. And for a while it was fine. We still had intimacy, kissing, long touches, the closeness of sharing a bed without crossing the line. We learned each other's bodies in careful ways. Sometimes we would stop and laugh because we were both inexperienced, both unsure. It was sweet in a way that made me believe we were building something deeper than physical desire. But sweetness can turn into hunger. And hunger can turn into resentment if it's never allowed to be fed. The first year, I told myself it didn't matter. The second year, I started noticing the quiet frustration in my own body, the ache of wanting to feel chosen completely, not partially. The third year, it became the thing that hovered over us even when we didn't speak about it, like a third person in the room. The worst part was that Jake wasn't cruel about it. He wasn't manipulative. He didn't dangle marriage like a prize he could give when it was convenient. He just stayed where he was, and my life stayed stuck with him. Meanwhile, everything around us changed. I was scraping by, part-time work, cheap groceries, counting coins before buying anything that wasn't necessary. Marriage didn't even feel like a real concept. It felt like something people did when they were stable, when they had careers, when they weren't still living like students. Jake, on the other hand, graduated a year before me and got hired at a consulting firm in the city. Suddenly, he had a real salary, real colleagues, real work events. He would tell me stories about expensive team lunches and drinks after work, not to brag, just sharing his life. But every time he said, "We went out for cocktails," I'd look down at my dinner of instant noodles and feel something ugly tighten in my throat. Not jealousy, fear. Fear that he was growing into a world I couldn't follow. Fear that he would one day wake up and realize love wasn't enough to justify waiting. And underneath that fear was the ache of something I didn't want to admit. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who waited years for marriage just to be allowed to be fully loved. Still, I stayed. Because I loved him. Because I believed loyalty was proof of character. Because leaving felt like admitting I wasn't enough. That my patience had limits. That my love had conditions. And then 8 months ago, after another conversation that ended in the same dead circle, him saying, "Someday," me hearing, "Not yet," I did something I never thought I'd do. I ended it. We were standing in his kitchen. The overhead light was harsh, making everything too clear. He reached for my hands and I pulled back, not dramatically, just tired. "I can't keep waiting forever," I said, voice shaking. "And I can't keep pretending this isn't affecting me." His face crumpled. "We can work through it." "How?" I asked, tears rising hot. "We've been working through it for years." He begged. He promised he loved me. He asked me to stay. But deep down I knew he was asking me to accept a timeline he couldn't even define. So I packed my things over the next week and moved out. I blocked him because I didn't trust myself not to run back the moment loneliness hit. I forced my heart to do the one thing it hated most. Let go. For 6 months, there was silence. I graduated. I got hired as a graduate engineer at a manufacturing company. Decent salary, not glamorous, but it made me feel like I was finally stepping into adulthood. I moved into a share house with roommates, started waking up early, started learning what it felt like to build a life that wasn't constantly waiting on someone else's readiness. And then, a week after I started my job, my phone buzzed. A message from Jake. I wanted to talk. I stared at the screen so long my eyes burned because I knew that if I opened that door, whatever I'd built in those months might crumble. But some part of me still wanted closure. Some part of me still wanted him to choose me. So I agreed to meet him for coffee. And that was the day my life tilted again. Because he didn't come back with the ending I imagined. He came back with a truth that made me question whether I had ever been waiting for love, or just waiting to be replaced. The cafe he chose was one we used to go to when we were still together. Quiet, all pale wood and soft music, the kind of place that remembered us even if we pretended we were strangers now. I arrived early, hands wrapped around a cup I didn't really want, watching couples lean into each other across small tables. I told myself this was just a conversation. Closure, nothing more. When Jake walked in, my chest tightened before my mind could catch up. He looked the same, familiar in a way that felt unfair, but also different. His clothes were sharper, his posture more confident, the kind of confidence that comes when someone finally feels settled in their life. He smiled when he saw me, tentative, like he didn't know what version of me he was about to meet. "Hey," he said softly. Hey, I replied, standing before sitting back down, suddenly aware of every movement of my body. We talked about safe things at first: work, my new job, his projects at the firm, the weather, the kind of small talk people use to build a bridge over something dangerous underneath. Then he stopped stirring his coffee. I've been thinking about you a lot, he said. His voice dropped. About us. My fingers curled tighter around my cup. Okay. I miss what we had, he continued, and I don't think it had to end the way it did. There it was, the sentence I had replayed in my head during the worst nights, the one where he realized he made a mistake and came back ready to fight for us. But then he said the part that made my stomach drop. If we got back together, he said carefully, we could have a full relationship now. The way he said it, measured, deliberate, made my breath catch. He wasn't talking about moving in together, or marriage plans, or emotional openness. He was talking about sex. I blinked. I don't understand. Something flickered across his face: hesitation, discomfort, guilt. Things are different now, he said. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Different how? He stared at the table for a long moment. Then he took a breath like someone stepping off a ledge. I'm not a virgin anymore. The cafe noise faded. Cups clinking, people laughing. It all blurred into a distant hum as the words settled into my body like ice water. I didn't speak at first. I just watched him. The man who made me wait years for a promise. The man who told me that his father's expectations mattered more than his own desires. Okay, I finally said, because I didn't trust myself with anything else yet. It happened after we broke up, he rushed to add. I wasn't cheating. I would never. I know, I interrupted quietly. We weren't together. That wasn't the part that hurt. What happened? I asked. He hesitated again. There was someone at work. Her name's Jordan. She's older, early 30s. It wasn't serious. It just happened. The word happened rang in my ears like a lie people tell themselves to avoid responsibility. So, I said slowly, choosing each word like it could cut me if I wasn't careful. The only reason you're okay sleeping with me now is because you already slept with someone else. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. Once. The nod was small, but it shattered something deep inside me. I realized, he said quietly, that after it happened, the promise didn't feel the same anymore. I wasn't holding on to it the way I used to. I stared at him, my reflection warped in the dark surface of the coffee. But it felt the same when I was the one waiting. He flinched. I'm not saying I didn't care, he said quickly. I cared a lot. I still do. After everything ended, I started questioning why I was holding on to something I promised when I was 14. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I forced it back down. Crying here would give him something I wasn't ready to give. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I waited years. I respected your boundaries. I rearranged my expectations around your promise. And now that it's broken, just not with me, you want to come back and offer me what I asked for all along. That's not... He stopped himself. I know how it sounds. How it sounds? I laughed softly, the sound sharp and bitter. It sounds like I was good enough to wait for, but not good enough to be chosen. His eyes filled. That's not true. But the truth had already spoken for him. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but my decision was clear in a way it hadn't been in months. I need time, I said. I can't make this decision right now. He nodded, relief flickering across his face like he thought that meant hope. I didn't correct him. I walked out of the cafe, the cold air hitting my face like a slap, and I realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. The man I had waited for years to change already had. Just not for me. Over the next few days, the conversation replayed in my head on a loop. Every sentence, every pause, every excuse wrapped in self-reflection. I wasn't angry that he slept with someone else while we were broken up. What destroyed me was the realization that the principle he made me live by was flexible, and I was the only one who paid the cost. A week later, unable to untangle my thoughts alone, I did something I rarely do. I asked strangers for perspective. I posted the story online, stripped down to its bones, hoping someone would tell me I was overreacting. They didn't. The responses were brutally consistent. Move on. He showed you who he is. Waiting for someone to change is a mistake. Some people were harsh. Some were kind. Some pointed out what I didn't want to admit, that I should have ended things earlier instead of hoping love would be enough. They were right. And as the days passed, something inside me settled, not into peace yet, but into clarity. I wasn't torn because I wanted him back. I was torn because he came back. And that difference would change everything. The clarity didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly between sleepless nights and long mornings where I stared at my phone without touching it. I told myself I just needed time to think, time to understand whether the pain I felt was grief or insult. I didn't contact Jake for a week after the cafe. I let his last look, hopeful, fragile, fade from my mind. I reread the comments from strangers who had no reason to protect my feelings. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They didn't romanticize patience or loyalty. They saw the situation for what it was. And then something else happened, something that snapped the fog in my head into sharp focus. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where the world feels paused. No urgency, no noise. I was folding laundry in my share house, half listening to my roommate's music through the thin walls, when my phone buzzed. A message. From Jake. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're already wounded. I've been thinking a lot. I hope you're okay. I just want you to know I really mean it when I say I want a future with you. I stared at the screen, my heart doing that stupid, hopeful flip it hadn't earned the right to do anymore. Before I could respond, or talk myself out of responding, another message came through. I probably should have been more honest at the cafe. My stomach tightened. Jordan and I. It wasn't as casual as I made it sound. There it was, the line that changed everything. I sat down on the edge of my bed, my hands cold. Not as casual could mean anything. A few weeks? A fling that turned emotional? I braced myself and typed back, fingers trembling. What do you mean? The reply took longer this time. Too long. We were seeing each other for a few months. We traveled together once. It ended recently. Traveled. Together. My breath left my body in a slow, broken exhale. At the cafe, he had framed it as something that just happened. A moment of weakness. A single crossing of a line. But now the picture was different, sharper, uglier. He hadn't just broken a promise. He had replaced me. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall. Images I had never asked for filled my mind. Him holding her hand somewhere far away, sharing hotel rooms, choosing her again and again, while I was still rearranging my life around the damage he left behind. I typed slowly, deliberately. You said it wasn't serious. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. That sentence did something violent to my chest. You didn't want to hurt me, I whispered aloud to the empty room. So you lied. I stood up and started pacing, my thoughts racing faster than my body could keep up. This wasn't about sex anymore. This wasn't about religion. This wasn't even about timing. This was about choice. He chose to explore his freedom with someone else. He chose honesty only when it suited him. And now, he was coming back because the weight of his choices was inconvenient. I sent one final message. I need space. Please don't contact me again. Then I blocked his number. Immediately. No dramatic pause, no explanation. Just the click of a digital door closing. My hands were shaking afterward, but something inside me felt strangely still, like a storm had finally broken and left the air clean. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later, I went away with friends for a long weekend, camping in a national park hours outside the city. No signal, no distractions, just dirt under my boots and the crackle of a fire at night. One evening, as we sat around the campfire, faces lit orange by flames, someone asked casually, "So, whatever happened with Jake?" I stared into the fire, watching sparks lift and disappear. "I'm not taking him back," I said. My friend tilted his head. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If he hadn't messaged you first," he said gently, "would you have ever reached out to him again?" The question landed heavy. I didn't answer right away, because in the silence, the truth rose so clearly it almost scared me. No. I wouldn't have. I had been moving forward, healing, building something new. The only reason I felt torn was because he showed up again, not because I wanted him. That realization hit harder than anything Jake had said, because it meant the part of me that loved him had already let go. When I came back from the trip, my phone was full of missed messages from an unknown number. 8 of them. They started hopeful. "Did you make a decision? I really think we should talk." Then they shifted. "I'm sorry I reached out. I think it was a mistake. I'm back with Jordan. Things are going well." And then the last one. "I wasn't fully honest with you. We were more serious than I said." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed one word. "No," and blocked the number. It should have ended there. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe the need to see the full truth, pushed me to look him up. And what I found erased the last remaining doubt I had about my decision. I told myself I was done. that blocking him, again, was the final punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had dragged on too long. But emotions don't obey logic, and closure isn't always clean. Sometimes it comes with one last, unnecessary glance backward. I looked him up. It wasn't hard. Same firm, same city. His profile photo looked exactly like the man I remembered. Confident smile, tailored suit, someone who belonged in the rooms he now moved through so easily. I scrolled before I could stop myself, the way you press on a bruise just to confirm it still hurts. And then I saw her. Jordan. Not a vague idea. Not a name floating between excuses. A real woman with a real face and a very visible life intertwined with his. There were photos of them together, work events, dinners at places I could never afford back then, arms around each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. One photo stopped me cold. It was taken months ago, long before our coffee conversation. They were standing in front of a luxury hotel overseas, city lights glowing behind them, his hand resting comfortably on her waist. They had traveled together, while I was still healing, while I was still rebuilding, while he was telling me it wasn't serious. I closed the app, my throat tight. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, feeling something inside me finally settle. Not peace exactly, more like resignation mixed with relief. You didn't imagine it, I told myself. You didn't overreact. You saw it clearly. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I thought that would be the end. Then, a week later, there was a knock on my door. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just come home from work, shoes kicked off, hair pulled into a messy knot. When I opened the door, my breath caught. He was standing there. Jake. I just want to talk, he said, voice low, eyes searching my face like he still had a right to read me. I should have closed the door. I know that now. But exhaustion makes you soft in the wrong moments, and curiosity still had its claws in me. We sat in the living room, the distance between us polite, measured. He started talking almost immediately, explaining, correcting, unraveling his own lies. He admitted the truth this time. He told me he had initiated things with Jordan, that she hadn't pressured him, that he'd wanted her, chosen her. He said after the breakup he questioned why he was still living by a promise he made at 14, that letting go of it felt like freedom. I listened, quiet, still. When he finished, I asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" He looked down. I had a fight with her. Someone at work made a comment about me being another one of her girlfriends. I found out she has a reputation for dating younger men she works with. Something twisted in my chest. Not jealousy, not satisfaction, just a dull sadness. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "I just needed someone to listen," he said. "Someone who knows me." We talked for hours about his job, my new life, where we were headed separately. By the end of the night, the truth was undeniable. We weren't getting back together. When he left, we hugged, brief, distant, like two people acknowledging a chapter that had already closed. After he walked out, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was free. And that was when something unexpected happened. I met someone new, not as a replacement, not as a distraction, just someone who showed up without conditions. Her name was Jenna, and meeting her would prove something I didn't know I needed to learn. That real connection doesn't make you wait in uncertainty. It meets you where you are. Meeting Jenna felt like stepping into sunlight after years of gray. She was 25, worked as an accountant at a large firm, and had a laugh that made even my most anxious thoughts feel lighter. At first it was casual, coffee, quick lunches, sharing small jokes, but there was an ease about her I hadn't realized I'd been craving. She didn't require me to explain the past or justify the scars it left. We got along immediately. I could be myself around her, without the weight of expectations or unspoken rules. We started hanging out more outside the house. Weekend brunches, walks through city streets, evenings talking about everything from work stress to childhood memories. Slowly, naturally, we became official. But life has a way of testing stability. A few weeks after we made it official, Jenna invited me to a work party at one of her colleagues' apartments. I didn't think much of it. It was casual, full of professionals from her firm, nothing unusual, until I met him. Jordan, the same Jordan who had been Jake's serious affair. At first, I didn't make the connection. He was just a colleague, a stranger in a suit. But the moment he saw me, his eyes shifted. recognition, surprise, maybe even panic. He had put the pieces together. And then, of course, I realized the Jordan in front of me was the same man who had changed my past without my consent. Jade, no, Jake's ex-girlfriend, was there too. And the sight of them together, polished and composed, was a subtle hammer to the fragile piece I'd been building. They smiled, they laughed, but there was a tension in their posture that told me they were measuring me, just as I was measuring them. I felt my jaw tighten, a surge of anger and disgust rising. But I didn't act. I didn't confront. Instead, I stayed close to Jenna, leaning into the warmth and safety of someone who truly belonged in my life now. The night was long, punctuated by small moments of discomfort, glances from Jake's ex, whispers from colleagues, but it ended without drama. Yet inside, the conflict had escalated. I realized that healing wasn't just about moving on emotionally. It was about seeing the past clearly, understanding the choices people made, and protecting the life I was building from chaos that didn't belong to it. Even after that night, there were reminders, messages from old numbers, mutual acquaintances hinting at reconnections, social media images that popped up unexpectedly. Each one was a small test, a tiny quake threatening the foundation I had carefully laid with Jenna. But every time I reminded myself I am not the same girl who waited for Jake. This awareness, this inner resolve grew stronger. I stopped doubting. I stopped considering what if. I focused on what was real, tangible, and nurturing. Jenna, my new life, my work, and the knowledge that I was no longer waiting for someone else's morality or timing to define me. By the end of that month, the escalation of tension had served its purpose. It sharpened my boundaries. It forced me to recognize that past attachments could intrude, but only if I allowed them to, and I refused. I had endured waiting, betrayal, and the weight of unkept promises. Now I was stepping into clarity, armed with experience and the undeniable truth. I choose myself. Even with Jenna by my side, life wasn't suddenly easy. The past clung to me like a shadow that refused to fade. Some nights, I'd lie awake in the quiet apartment, listening to the city hum through the windows, and the memories would crawl back. The cafe, his words, the photos of him with Jordan. Every detail felt sharper, crueler when replayed alone. I remembered the helplessness of those months waiting, how I had structured my life around someone else's choices, how I had convinced myself that patience and loyalty were virtues worth the cost. And now, seeing the truth laid bare, I felt both rage and emptiness. Rage at his selfishness, emptiness because I'd invested so much of myself into something that never fully existed for me. It wasn't just about Jake anymore. The dark moment came when I recognized the quiet, gnawing fear that maybe I would never fully escape the scars of those 4 years. That perhaps my capacity to trust again had been chipped, maybe permanently. Even Jenna's warmth couldn't erase the images burned into my memory. Jake's half-truths, Jordan's smug grin, the subtle thrill of being chosen second. I wandered through the apartment, running my hands along surfaces, feeling disconnected from the life I had worked so hard to build. My reflection in the window at night looked foreign. Someone strong, yet vulnerable. Courageous, yet wary. I realized the damage wasn't just external. It was deeply internal. For hours, I wrestled with myself. Should I revisit the past? Should I contact him to demand answers? Closure? Perhaps revenge? My heart wanted confrontation. My mind screamed for peace. Every option seemed to carry weight that I couldn't bear. I was at the bottom, not broken, not destroyed, but teetering on a ledge where every memory threatened to pull me over. Even Jenna noticed. One evening, as we sat quietly on the couch, she reached for my hand. "Talk to me," she whispered. I shook my head, biting back the tears that refused to come. I couldn't articulate the storm inside me. It was in that solitude, that dark moment, that I realized true healing would require more than just removing him from my life. It would require confronting the betrayal, not for him, not for validation, but for myself. I had to examine the wounds, acknowledge the pain, and choose to reclaim my story on my own terms. This was the emotional nadir, the point where I felt the weight of waiting, betrayal, and deception pressing down on me with a suffocating intensity. It was necessary. The dark moment always comes before the turning point. And I knew, somewhere deep inside, that I had the strength to rise. But first, I had to face the shadows I had carried for far too long. The turning point didn't arrive with fanfare or revelation. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, like sunlight slipping through a crack in a closed room. One evening, after weeks of restless reflection, I found myself scrolling through social media, not out of curiosity about him, but to check on my own boundaries. And there it was, a picture Jake had posted months ago with Jordan, the same luxury hotel from before. Only this time I noticed the subtle tension in their smiles, the way his hand lingered uncomfortably on hers. She wasn't looking happy. He wasn't looking content. Something about it didn't fit the narrative he had fed me. I paused, my heart hammering, not with jealousy, but with clarity. I realized I had been holding power in my own hands the entire time. I had waited, yes. I had felt betrayed, yes. But I was the one who could choose what came next. No one else could make that decision for me. The emotional chains Jake had wrapped around me for years suddenly felt light in comparison to the weight of my own agency. I thought of Jenna, the warmth she brought, the laughter that filled spaces I had thought would remain hollow forever. I remembered the evenings we spent sharing dreams, not obligations, the way she looked at me without expectation, without judgment, with a quiet affirmation that I mattered as I was. And I realized the truth I had been avoiding. Jake's return, his confessions, even his attempts at honesty, all of it was irrelevant to the life I wanted to lead. I didn't need his permission to be loved. I didn't need his choice to validate my worth. I didn't even need closure from him to move forward. That night, I made a decision. I would not engage with him again. I would not let his past intrude on the life I was building, and I would not let the betrayal define me. I was done waiting for someone else's morality to dictate my happiness. The next day, I acted on that decision. I blocked his new number, removed his emails, and unfollowed him on every social platform. The gesture was simple, but it felt monumental, like reclaiming territory I had unconsciously ceded years ago. It was a declaration. My story was mine, and no one else had the right to rewrite it. In the weeks that followed, I began noticing subtle shifts in myself. I walked taller, spoke with more certainty, and allowed myself small joys without guilt or fear. Each day was a quiet affirmation. I had survived betrayal, waded through uncertainty, and emerged stronger, wiser, and fiercely independent. I didn't feel the absence of Jake as much as I felt the presence of my own life, vivid, unencumbered, and ready for the next chapter. And for the first time in years, I knew I would never let anyone else dictate the boundaries of my heart again. The ripple effects of my decision were immediate, subtle, and yet profoundly satisfying. Jake didn't contact me again. I didn't hear from him, and I didn't need to. His absence became a quiet proof that I had chosen correctly. Without drama, without confrontation, the story finally settled into its natural order. He with his choices, me with mine. Jenna and I continued building our relationship, stronger for the trials I had endured. There was a sense of safety I hadn't felt in years, the comfort of being with someone who treated me as a partner, not a project, not a challenge, not a test of patience. Our shared evenings, our spontaneous weekend plans, even the small arguments about mundane things like groceries or whose turn it was to cook, all felt grounded in reality. For the first time, love wasn't conditional, it was reciprocal. Meanwhile, Jake's ex, Jordan, became irrelevant. The polished social media posts, the overseas trips, the apparent sophistication, they were meaningless to me now. I realized that none of those things had any bearing on my life. The choices he had made to hurt or mislead me no longer had power. My life had moved past them. Even friends who had been privy to my struggle noticed the change. I walked with a different rhythm, spoke with a different tone. They commented on my confidence, my focus, my laughter that came more easily. Where once the betrayal lingered like a shadow, now it was a faint echo, a memory that reminded me how far I had come, not what had been taken. I also noticed how quickly Jake's world began to crumble in the ways I hadn't expected. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that his relationship with Jordan was strained. There were arguments, unspoken tensions, and subtle fractures that hinted at dissatisfaction beneath the polished veneer he projected online. Seeing this unfold from a distance, I felt no joy in schadenfreude, only a quiet affirmation. Actions have consequences, and choices matter. Those who build on deception eventually confront the instability they've created. For me, the fallout wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, clarity, and integrity. I didn't need to expose him, shame him, or prove a point. I simply stepped fully into my own life, and in doing so, allowed the natural consequences of dishonesty and poor decisions to unfold for those who had caused pain. By the time months passed, the emotional detritus of the past was gone. I had reclaimed my narrative, and it was vivid, unapologetic, and completely mine. I walked into the world lighter, more aware, and profoundly certain. Betrayal has power only if you let it, and waiting for someone else to change is always a gamble you might lose. It's been months since the storm of Jake's return, his confessions, and the tangled web of waiting, betrayal, and regret. And now, when I look back, I see how far I've come, not just in leaving someone who didn't choose me, but in discovering my own resilience. My relationship with Jenna has grown into something steady, nurturing, and alive. We laugh easily, share ambitions, and support each other without conditions. For the first time, love feels like a safe space, not a test I'm constantly failing. My career is moving forward, my friendships are thriving, and I no longer carry the weight of someone else's choices in my chest. Every day, I feel a quiet sense of ownership over my life, over my time, and over my heart. I also learned to forgive, not to absolve the wrongs done to me, but to free myself from carrying their weight. Forgiving Jake wasn't about letting him back in. It was about letting go of the anger, the lingering what-ifs, and the pain that had threatened to anchor me in the past. The betrayal no longer defines me. It informs me, teaches me, but doesn't limit me. The lesson I want to share, especially for anyone watching this on YouTube and nodding along to a story that feels uncomfortably familiar, is simple, but vital. Waiting for someone else to change is a gamble with your own life. Loyalty, patience, and love are virtues, but they become destructive when invested in a person who doesn't choose you fully. Life moves, opportunities appear, and hearts grow. You cannot anchor your future to someone else's timeline or promises made to others. The day I truly embraced this, I felt reborn. There's a strength that comes not from revenge, not from proving a point, but from reclaiming your story and choosing yourself. It's a quiet, profound power, the kind that doesn't scream, but carries you forward with unwavering certainty. As for Jake and his past, their choices unfold in ways I no longer need to witness. My focus is here, on my life, on the people who respect and cherish me, and on building a future without compromise to my own worth. If there's one thing I've learned from waiting, heartbreak, and betrayal, it's this. Your life, your love, and your happiness are worth protecting. Choose yourself, every single day. And now, as I step forward, fully present in my own story, I finally understand what it feels like to be free and ready for everything that life has left to offer.